The crystalline walls of the Vraxian royal palace hummed with an energy that Princess Kaelin had learned to read like ancient scripture. Today, the vibrations spoke of tension, secrecy, and something that made her lavender skin prickle with unease. She moved through the corridors with the fluid grace of her people, her silver hair catching the light from the bioluminescent panels that lined the walls. "Your Highness," came the familiar voice of Chancellor Vex, his forearms folded in the traditional gesture of formal address. "The High Council awaits." Kaelin's violet eyes narrowed. Emergency sessions were rare, and the Chancellor's nervous energy was palpable. "What matter requires such urgency, Vex?" "It concerns an ancient debt, Princess, one that must be honored." The council chamber opened before them like a flower of living stone, its walls shifting to accommodate the gathering. 7 beings from across the Vraxian Empire sat in their floating meditation spheres, their collective consciousness creating a web of whispered thoughts that Kaelin could sense, but not decipher. "Princess Kaelin," spoke Elder Zephyra, her ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. 23 cycles ago, when you were but a child, an incident occurred that nearly cost your family their lives. The memory surfaced unbidden. Shadows in the night, her younger brother's terrified cries, the acrid smell of weapons fire. She had been 7, hiding behind her mother's robes as chaos erupted around them. "The terrorist attack at the lunar station," she whispered. "Yes. What you never knew was that a single warrior turned the tide that night. A human, fighting with skills that defied explanation. Your parents' lives, your brother's life, your own, all preserved by one man's intervention." Kaelin's hearts, both of them, began beating in an irregular rhythm. "Why was this kept from me?" "Because revealing his identity would have meant his death," Elder Zephyra continued. "He vanished that night, but not before extracting a promise from your father. Should he ever return to claim the debt, it would be honored without question." A holographic display materialized in the chamber's center, showing the image of a human male. He appeared to be in his early 30s by human standards, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold depths of sorrow and determination. His features were strong but not harsh, and there was something about his stance that spoke of barely contained power. "His name is Thane Morrison," Chancellor Vex announced, "and 3 days ago, he presented himself at our embassy, claiming the debt." "What does he want?" Kaelin asked, though a growing dread suggested she already knew. "Marriage," Elder Zephyra said simply. "He has invoked the ancient right of Veltar, a life debt that can only be repaid through the binding of bloodlines." The Tomei chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the walls. Kaelin stared at the image, trying to reconcile this ordinary-looking human with the savior of her family. "You're telling me I must marry a complete stranger because of something that happened when I was a child?" "The debt is legitimate and binding," another council member spoke. "Your father swore it before witnesses, sealed it with his royal blood. To refuse would bring dishonor upon our entire lineage." Kaelin's mind raced. Marriage within the royal family was always political, but this felt different, more personal and yet completely impersonal at the same time. "What do we know of this Thane Morrison? His background, his intentions?" "Very little," Vex admitted. "Official records show him as a former Earth military officer, discharged several years ago. He's traveled extensively since then, working various security positions throughout the outer systems. His current residence is listed as a small transport vessel." "A wanderer," Kaelin mused. "Perhaps seeking citizenship and status through marriage." "Perhaps. Or perhaps there are other motivations we cannot yet discern." As she studied the hologram, something stirred within Kaelin. Not attraction exactly, but a strange recognition, as if some part of her remembered those eyes from her nightmares of that terrible night. "When is this marriage to take place?" "He has requested the ceremony occur within 7 days, as is his right under the terms of the debt." 7 days to prepare for a life bound to a stranger. 7 days to wonder why a simple human had risked everything to save her family, and why he had waited over 2 decades to claim his reward. "Very well," she said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Inform this Thane Morrison that Princess Kaelin of House Vraxis will honor her family's debt, but I want full surveillance on him until the ceremony. If he poses any threat to our people, it will be done, Your Highness. As the council dissolved and Kaelin was left alone with her thoughts, she couldn't shake the feeling that this marriage would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire galaxy. The walls continued their soft humming, but now they seemed to whisper of destiny and ancient powers stirring in the darkness between stars. The wedding chamber had been transformed into something that balanced Vraxian tradition with diplomatic necessity. Crystalline arches pulsed with soft bioluminescence, while human-compatible atmospheric processors hummed quietly in the corners. Princess Kaelin stood before her reflection, adjusting the ceremonial veil that cascaded down her back like liquid starlight. "You look beautiful, sister," Prince Davin said softly, his own lavender skin bearing the ritual markings of witness and protector. "But you look terrified. Wouldn't you be?" Kaelin's fingers trembled as she touched the marriage circlet, a band of living metal that would bond her life force to her husband's. "I'm about to bind myself to a complete stranger." The ceremony itself was surprisingly brief. Thane Morrison stood across from her in formal attire that seemed oddly military despite its civilian cut. Up close, he was taller than she'd expected, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of barely contained strength. When their eyes met during the ritual binding, she felt a jolt of something. Recognition? Attraction? Fear? "By the ancient laws of debt and honor," Elder Zephyra intoned, "these two souls are bound in sacred union. What was owed is now paid. What was separate is now joined." The circlet activated as Thane placed it on her head, its warm metal sending tendrils of energy through her nervous system. For a moment, she could swear she felt an echo of his thoughts, confusion, determination, and an unexpected gentleness that contradicted his warrior's stance. The reception was a carefully orchestrated affair, with representatives from dozens of worlds offering congratulations that felt more like political maneuvering. Kaelin found herself studying her new husband as he navigated the conversations with surprising diplomatic skill for a supposed wanderer. "You handle yourself well among politicians," she observed during a quiet moment between formal greetings. Thane's blue eyes met hers with what might have been amusement. "Survival often requires knowing how to read people, Your Highness." "Kaelin," she corrected, "we are married now. Surely we can dispense with titles in private." "Kaelin," he repeated, and she felt an unexpected warmth at hearing her name in his voice. "Then you should call me Thane." Their first night together was awkward with unspoken expectations. The royal quarters had been prepared with a massive bed that could accommodate both their physiologies, though neither seemed inclined to test its capacity. Instead, they maintained a careful distance, like two predators unsure of each other's intentions. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," Kaelin said as Thane began arranging cushions beside the window. "The bed is large enough for separate spaces." "I'm used to sleeping rough," he replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested it wasn't entirely by choice. "Besides, I don't want to make you uncomfortable." As days passed, they began developing an odd rhythm of coexistence. Mornings brought formal duties, council meetings where Thane's presence raised eyebrows and questions about Earth's current political status. Afternoons were spent in careful conversation, each learning to navigate the other's cultural expectations. "Tell me about Earth," Kaelin asked one evening as they shared dinner on the balcony overlooking the capital city's bioluminescent gardens. "What was it like before?" "Before what?" Thane's expression had grown guarded. "Before you left to wander the outer systems." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Beautiful," he finally said, "and doomed." There were moments when the awkwardness gave way to something deeper. When Kaelin's hand accidentally brushed his while reaching for the same datapad, neither pulled away immediately. When she found him standing on the balcony late at night, staring at the stars with an expression of profound loss, she felt an urge to comfort him that surprised her. "Do you regret it?" she asked during one of these midnight encounters. "Claiming the debt?" Thane turned to study her face in the pale light from the moons. Do you regret honoring it? I asked first. A smile ghosted across his features, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. No, I don't regret it, though I'm not sure I deserve it. Deserve what? You. This chance at normalcy. Before she could ask what he meant, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed the balcony in harsh red illumination. As Chancellor Vex's voice echoed through the communication system, "All royals to secure positions immediately. We have multiple hostile contacts approaching the system." Kaylin's training kicked in as she moved toward the secure chambers, but she paused when she realized Thane hadn't followed. He stood frozen on the balcony, his entire body tense with what looked like anticipation rather than fear. "Thane, we need to get to safety." "They found me," he whispered, and something in his voice made her heart skip. "I hoped, but they always find me." "Who found you?" Instead of answering, he turned to her with an expression that was part apology, part determination. "Kaylin, I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens tonight, whatever you see, remember that I never wanted to bring this to your world." "What are you talking about?" The palace shuddered as the first wave of attack ships entered the atmosphere. Through the transparisteel windows, she could see the elegant curves of Vraxian defense ships engaging sleek predatory craft that moved like living things through the night sky. "Promise me," Thane insisted, gripping her shoulders with gentle but firm hands. "Promise you'll remember that I tried to stay hidden." "Thane, you're scaring me!" Another explosion rocked the palace, closer this time. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons and the shouts of guards mobilizing for defense. "I have to go," he said, and kissed her, forehead with surprising tenderness. "Stay in the secure chambers, don't come looking for me." "Where are you going?" But he was already moving, shedding his formal jacket to reveal a form-fitting suit beneath that definitely wasn't civilian clothing. As he reached the doorway, he paused and looked back at her one more time. "I'm sorry, Kaylin, for everything that's about to happen." Then he was gone, leaving her alone on the balcony as the sounds of battle grew closer and more intense. Above the chaos, she could swear she heard something that sounded like a war cry. Primal, fierce, and definitely human. The secure chambers felt like a luxurious prison as Kaylin paced their confines, listening to the battle raging outside. Through the reinforced walls, she could hear explosions, weapon fire, and the distinctive hum of Vraxian shield generators straining under assault. But what tormented her most was Thane's absence and his cryptic warning. "Princess, you must remain here," Captain Zoran insisted, his scarred face grim as he monitored tactical displays. "The attackers are unlike anything we've encountered. They're not after territory or resources. They're hunting someone." "Hunting who?" Before he could answer, a massive explosion shook the palace foundations. The lights flickered, and through the brief darkness, Kaylin heard something that made her blood freeze. A sound like nothing in Vraxian experience, a roar of fury and determination that seemed to come from the depths of some ancient hell. "What was that?" she whispered. Captain Zoran's four eyes widened as he studied his scanner readings. That's impossible. The energy signature is off the charts, but it's coming from inside the palace." Another roar echoed through the structure, and this time it was followed by the distinctive whine of multiple weapons firing simultaneously. Then screaming, not of pain, but of terror from the attackers. "I'm going out there," Kaylin declared, moving toward the chamber door. "Princess, no. Your husband specifically ordered." "My husband?" Kaylin spun around, her violet eyes blazing. "What exactly did Thane tell you?" Zoran's expression grew troubled. He said to keep you safe no matter what sounds you heard. He said you might try to help, but that seeing him fight would change everything between you." The implications hit her like a physical blow. "He's out there, fighting them alone." "Not alone, Princess, our guards." A series of explosions cut him off, followed by an eerie silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. Then came the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside, steady, measured, and definitely approaching their position. Multiple hostiles eliminated, came Thane's voice through the comm system, but it sounded different now, colder, more focused. Palace is secure. You can stand down the lockdown. When the chamber doors opened, Kalen barely recognized the man who entered. Thane's clothes were torn and stained with something that definitely wasn't his own blood. His hands were steady, but she could see the faint tremor of adrenaline still coursing through him. Most shocking of all were his eyes. No longer the gentle blue she'd grown accustomed to, but something harder, more primal. "Are you hurt?" was the first thing he asked, reaching for her with hands that she now noticed bore calluses in very specific patterns. "I'm fine, but you—" She gestured at his appearance. "What happened out there?" "Nothing that concerns you. Nothing that—" Kalen's voice rose. "Thane, the entire palace was under attack. I heard weapons fire, explosions, and sounds I can't even describe. How is that nothing that concerns me?" Captain Zoran cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should show you the surveillance footage, Princess." "No," Thane said sharply. "That's not necessary." But Zoran was already activating the holographic display, and Kalen found herself watching scenes that redefined her understanding of combat. The attackers had been professionals, sleek armored figures moving with precision through the palace corridors. They should have overwhelmed any single defender. Instead, she watched her husband move through them like death incarnate. He didn't just fight. He flowed, each movement economical and devastating. Weapons that should have required two hands he wielded as if they were extensions of his body. Energy blasts that should have been fatal seemed to bend around him, and when he struck back, entire squads of attackers fell. "My gods," she whispered. "What are you?" Thane's jaw tightened. "What I've always been. What I hoped I could stop being. The last human warrior," Captain Zoran said quietly, consulting his datapad. "I've been running cross-references since the attack began. Thane Morrison is listed in 17 different galactic databases as deceased, but the descriptions match. Earth's final military asset, presumed killed when humanity's home system fell. The room fell silent except for the soft humming of palace systems returning to normal operation." Kalen stared at her husband. This man she'd married to honor a debt, who had just single-handedly repelled a force that should have overwhelmed an entire garrison. "Is it true?" she asked. Thane looked away. "Earth is gone. Has been for 3 years. I was off-world when it happened, leading a diplomatic mission that turned out to be a trap. By the time I fought my way back," he swallowed hard. "There was nothing left to save. So you've been wandering the galaxy, hiding your identity, trying to, but they always find me eventually. The ones who destroyed my world, they know I'm still out there. They won't stop hunting me until I'm dead." Kalen felt pieces clicking into place. "That's why you claimed the debt. Not for citizenship or status, for protection. You thought marrying into the royal family would make you harder to target." "Partly," he admitted, "but also because I remembered you." "Remembered me?" "From that night at the lunar station. You were just a child, but you didn't cry when the shooting started. You stood in front of your little brother, ready to protect him with your bare hands. You reminded me why some things are worth fighting for." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Kalen found herself studying this man, her husband, with new eyes. The careful way he moved, the constant alertness she'd attributed to military training, the sadness that seemed to follow him like a shadow. "Those attackers tonight," she said, "they were hunting you specifically. The hegemony doesn't forgive survivors, especially ones who've caused them as much trouble as I have. And now they know where you are. Now they know where I am," he agreed. "Which means they know about you, about your family. I've brought my war to your doorstep, and I can't undo that." Kalen reached out and took his hand, noting how the calluses felt against her smooth skin. "Then we'll face it together." Thane's eyes widened. "Kalen, you don't understand. These aren't ordinary enemies. The hegemony has resources that—" "I'm not ordinary either," she interrupted, and for the first time since their marriage, She saw something like hope flicker in his expression. I'm Vraxian royalty, trained in combat and strategy since childhood. My people have survived a dozen wars by adapting and fighting smart. And now I'm married to the galaxy's most dangerous human. You're not afraid of me? She squeezed his hand. I'm terrified, but not of you, of losing you. We're bound now, Thane Morrison, for better or worse in war and peace. If you're truly the last human warrior, then you won't be fighting alone anymore. As if summoned by her words, the marriage circlet around her forehead began to pulse with a soft, warm light. Thane's eyes widened as he felt the same energy coursing through his own nervous system. What's happening? He asked. Before she could answer, Elder Zephyrah's voice echoed through the communication system. Princess Kaelin, please report to the council chambers immediately. The ancient prophecies are beginning to manifest, and we need to discuss what your union has awakened. The council chambers had been reconfigured into something resembling a war room, with holographic displays showing galactic star charts dotted with ominous red markers. Elder Zephyrah's ancient features were more troubled than Kaelin had ever seen them as the princess and Thane entered together, still holding hands from their walk through the corridors. The attack tonight was merely a probe, Zephyrah began without preamble. Our intelligence networks report massive hegemony fleet movements throughout 17 sectors. They're not just hunting your husband anymore, Princess. They're preparing for total war. Thane's grip on Kaelin's hand tightened. How many ships? Conservative estimates suggest 3,000 vessels, with more joining every day. It appears your survival has become a rallying point for human resistance cells throughout the galaxy. They see you as proof that Earth's children can still fight back. And the hegemony sees me as a threat that must be eliminated before I can unite those cells, Thane said grimly, which means everyone around me becomes a target. Not everyone, Chancellor Vex interjected, his forearms manipulating holographic controls to display an ancient text. The prophecies speak of a union that would awaken the Guardians, protectors who would rise when the galaxy faced its darkest hour. Kaelin studied the flowing script, written in Old Vraxian. I can barely read this. It's from the First Dynasty, isn't it? Older, Zephyrah confirmed. These texts predate our recorded history. They speak of a time when the stars themselves would bleed, and only the joining of warrior and guardian could restore balance. Warrior and guardian, Thane repeated. You think that refers to us? The timing is too precise to be coincidence. A human warrior, last of his kind, bonds with Vraxian royalty, just as an ancient enemy threatens to consume the galaxy. And there are physical manifestations. As if responding to her words, the marriage circlet around Kaelin's forehead pulsed brighter, its energy resonating with something deep in Thane's chest. He pressed a hand to his heart, feeling warmth spreading through his ribcage. What's happening? To us? Kaelin asked, her voice betraying a mixture of wonder and concern. The bonding process is accelerating, Zephyrah explained. Your life forces are synchronizing at a cellular level. It should take months, but the imminent danger seems to be triggering rapid evolution. Evolution into what? Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding again. This time, however, the alert pattern was different. Not the sharp staccato of immediate attack, but the low, rhythmic pulse that indicated long-range sensor contacts. Report, Kaelin commanded, her royal training asserting itself. Massive fleet, approaching the outer system, came Captain Zoran's voice over the comm. Hegemony configuration, but unlike anything in our databases, they're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding the surrender of the human anomaly. Thane stood, his expression shifting into the cold mask Kaelin had seen during the palace attack. How long do we have? 18 hours until they reach optimal firing position. Then we evacuate, Kaelin declared. Get the civilians to the deep shelters and prepare the fleet for— No, Thane's voice cut through her planning. Running won't work. They'll follow us wherever we go, and next time they'll bring even more ships. This ends here or it never ends. You're talking about fighting a fleet with what? A dozen Royal Guard vessels? I'm talking about fighting them with whatever these changes are doing to us. He gestured between them. where the air itself seemed to shimmer with barely visible energy. The prophecies didn't mention guardians for decoration. If we're supposed to protect the galaxy, now's the time to find out how. Over the next several hours, as the hegemony fleet crept closer, strange things began happening throughout the palace. Ancient defensive systems that had been dormant for centuries suddenly activated. Energy readings spiked in patterns that defied conventional physics, and most unsettling of all, Kalen and Thane found themselves sharing thoughts and sensations with increasing frequency. "Can you hear me?" Thane's voice echoed in her mind as they stood together in the palace's primary control center. "Yes," she replied without speaking aloud. "It's like our minds are merging. Not merging. Networking. I can feel your tactical knowledge, your understanding of Vraxian military doctrine, and you can feel your combat experience, your instincts." Kalen's eyes widened as she realized the implications. We're becoming a shared consciousness, a perfect fusion of warrior and strategist. The physical changes were equally dramatic. Kalen found her reflexes sharpening to inhuman levels, while Thane discovered he could interface directly with Vraxian technology through touch. When they held hands, energy coursed between them in visible streams of light. "The bonding is almost complete," Elder Zafira observed as she monitored their vital signs. "Your neural patterns are synchronizing, your cellular structures adapting to support enhanced capabilities. You're becoming something new, neither fully human nor fully Vraxian, but something greater than either could achieve alone." As night fell and the enemy fleet entered the outer system, Kalen and Thane stood together on the palace's highest balcony, watching the stars. In the distance, they could see the faint glimmers of approaching ships, death incarnate sailing across the cosmic void. "Are you ready for this?" Thane asked, his arm around her waist as energy continued to build between them. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," Kalen replied, leaning into his warmth, "but I'm ready to face it with you. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know." He paused, struggling with words. "I didn't expect to fall in love. When I claimed the dead, I thought I was just seeking shelter. But you've given me something to fight for beyond just survival." Kalen turned in his arms, studying his face in the pale moonlight. "And you've shown me that sometimes the best protection comes from the most unexpected places." She reached up to cup his cheek. "I love you too, Thane Morrison. Last human warrior, first of whatever we're becoming." Their kiss was electric, literally. Energy arced between them, visible tendrils of power that seemed to celebrate their emotional bond with displays of raw force. When they finally separated, both were glowing with soft, steady light. "Well," Kalen said with a breathless laugh, "I suppose that settles the question of whether we're ready." "The hegemony is in for quite a surprise," Thane agreed, pulling her close as the first enemy ships began their final approach toward the planet below. Above them, the stars themselves seemed to pulse in rhythm with their shared heartbeat, as if the universe itself was preparing for the battle to come. Dawn broke over the Vraxian capital like a promise of fire and steel. The hegemony fleet had taken position in high orbit, 3,000 vessels arranged in a perfect sphere of destruction around the planet. Their ultimatum was simple: surrender, Thane Morrison within 1 hour, or watch civilization burn. Kalen and Thane stood in the palace's command center, no longer quite human or Vraxian, but something magnificently other. The energy that had been building between them for days now flowed around them in visible streams, and their shared consciousness allowed them to process tactical information at superhuman speeds. "Fleet status?" Kalen asked, though she already knew the answer through her link with the palace systems. 47 vessels ready for combat," Admiral Trent reported, his weathered face grim. "Against 3,000. The math is challenging." "Mathematics were never my strong suit anyway," Thane said with dark humor, his consciousness simultaneously monitoring 17 different sensor feeds. "How long until the orbital platforms come online?" "The ancient defense grid hasn't been active in over 2 centuries, Chancellor Vex warned. "We don't even know if—" His words were cut off as massive energy signatures began appearing throughout the system. Orbital stations that had been considered archaeological relics suddenly blazed to life. their crystalline structures unfolding like flowers of living metal. The marriage bond had somehow awakened not just Kalen and Thane's abilities, but the entire planet's dormant defensive network. It's responding to us, Kalen realized, her consciousness touching the vast artificial minds of the ancient guardians. The defense grid recognizes us as its awakeners. Then let's give it something to defend, Thane replied, his awareness reaching out to connect with the approaching hegemony fleet. The enemy commander's voice crackled over all frequencies. This is Fleet Admiral Corks of the hegemony. You have 30 minutes to surrender the human terrorist or we begin bombardment. Instead of responding with words, Kalen and Thane responded with action. Moving in perfect synchronization, they reached out with their shared consciousness and began coordinating a defense that spanned the entire star system. The first wave of attacks came from the orbital platforms, beams of coherent energy that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for millennia. But the hegemony had faced ancient weapons before and had shielding designed to counter them. What they hadn't prepared for was the tactical brilliance of a merged consciousness that could coordinate thousands of defensive elements as a single organism. Vraxian fighter squadrons moved in patterns too complex for conventional commanders to orchestrate, threading between hegemony formations like dancers in a deadly ballet. The ancient defense grid pulsed with energy that seemed to bend space itself, creating gravitational anomalies that pulled enemy ships into devastating crossfires. But it was when Kalen and Thane took direct action that the battle truly turned. They had discovered that their bonded state allowed them to project their consciousness directly into the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. From there, they could affect matter and energy on a fundamental level, turning the very fabric of space-time into a weapon. Together, Thane thought as they stood hand in hand in the command center, their bodies glowing with barely contained power. Together, Kalen agreed, and they reached out with their combined will. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the hegemony forces. Ships that had been advancing in perfect formation suddenly found their weapons systems failing, their shields fluctuating, their navigation computers providing impossible readings. It was as if reality itself had turned against them. "What are they doing?" Admiral Trent whispered, staring at the tactical displays where enemy vessels were beginning to retreat in obvious confusion. "They're rewriting the local laws of physics." Elder Zephyra breathed, her ancient eyes wide with wonder. The prophecies spoke of guardians who could reshape reality through will alone. I thought it was metaphor. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt once Kalen and Thane learned to fully utilize their merged abilities. The hegemony had brought overwhelming force, but force meant nothing when your enemies could manipulate the fundamental constants of the universe in localized areas. By the time the enemy fleet finally retreated, limping away with less than half their original numbers, the transformation was complete. Kalen and Thane stood together in the aftermath, still glowing with residual energy. Their consciousness expanded far beyond the boundaries of their individual selves. "Is it over?" Chancellor Vex asked quietly. "This battle is over," Thane replied, his awareness tracking the fleeing hegemony ships across multiple star systems. "But the war is just beginning. They'll be back with different tactics, different weapons." "Let them come," Kalen said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the palace's crystalline walls. "We've awakened something that's been sleeping for eons. The galaxy has guardians again." As if responding to her words, signals began, arriving from across known space. Reports of ancient defense networks activating on hundreds of worlds, of human resistance cells suddenly displaying impossible capabilities, of entire star systems beginning to glow with the same energy that surrounded the royal couple. "The awakening is spreading," Zephyra observed, consulting readings that defied conventional understanding. "Your bond has triggered something galactic in scope." Thane pulled Kalen closer, marveling at how perfectly they fit together, not just physically but mentally and spiritually. "We're not the only guardians, are we?" "No," she replied, smiling as she felt the presence of other awakening pairs across the galaxy. Human survivors bonding with members of other species, creating new forms of consciousness and capability. We're the first, but not the last. The hegemony wanted to eliminate humanity's last warrior, Thane said with grim satisfaction. Instead, they've helped birth an entirely new form of life. As they stood together, watching the stars from their palace balcony, Kaelin reflected on how much had changed since that awkward wedding ceremony. She had married a stranger to honor a debt, and found herself part of something cosmic in scope. "Do you regret it?" she asked, echoing his question from their early days together. "Any of it?" Thane's answer came not in words, but in the warm pulse of shared consciousness, the flow of absolute love and trust that now connected them on every level. They were no longer two separate beings who had chosen to be together. They were a single entity experiencing existence through multiple perspectives. Above them, the orbital defense platforms continued their slow, stately dance around the planet, ready to protect not just this world, but any world where Guardians chose to make their stand. The galaxy had been dark for too long, dominated by those who chose conquest over cooperation. But the light was returning, carried by warriors who had learned that the greatest strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together. The Age of Guardians had begun,